Hello and welcome to the Auto Limits channel, where today we will be continuing our journey into finding a fuller understanding into the works of Sam Fuller. Today you have two hosts, both badly in need of a haircut. I'm Craig, and with me, as ever, is Robert Beams. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Craig. It's nice to feel to find out your feelings about my hair in this rather public forum, but I'll endeavour to get this fixed.
Well, I think I'm not including myself in that. I'm particularly unkempt today.
So what are we
Yeah.
looking at? What are we
Anyway.
looking at this week?
Today we are looking at the 1959 film Verboten with an exclamation mark. I feel like I should have shouted it a little bit harder, but yeah, we're digging into the film that sits in between 40 Guns and The Crimson Kimono. So this is
Indeed.
a first film of two in 1959. We're hitting another quick and dirty patch from Sam Fuller, where he just sort of bangs things out in a.
Was there ever not a quick and dirty patch?
Let's have a look.
It's like a quick and dirty career so far, getting through these, because he's really only been making films for, when was the first one? What was the year? Like late 40s, right? So he's been making films for about 10 years at this point.
Yeah, actually, we've been in like a 5-film quick and dirty patch where he doesn't make anything in 1958. But to be fair, he makes 3 in 1957 and 2 in 1959. Yeah. So he's allowed a bit of a break, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure you came across this in your reading, but this was obviously his first World War II film. He was obviously in World War II. He had experiences of the kind of the time and the place that this film is set, and it's his first, this far into his career, whatever it is, the 11th or 12th film. It's his first World War II film. But the thing that I read was that this was actually supposed to be his third movie after Baron of Arizona and before Steel Helmet. And I think it was even announced in Variety that this is what he was making back in 1950. But for whatever reason, and maybe you've got some explanation, but for whatever reason, it didn't actually end up being made then. He made the Korean War films instead.
Yeah, I think part of that was to do with the fact that he could make this Korean War film at the time of the Korean War and kind of make something very, very timely. I mean, the Steel Helmet really is about I think the Steel Helmet's really about World War II, but just set in the Korean War to make it a little bit more timely. But we talked a lot about how a lot of his direct experiences ended up in there. And yeah, he had this Verboten film sort of sitting in his back pocket. It's interesting, around this time, I mean, we'll get to Crimson Kimono next time, but around this time he was actually trying to get the Big Red 1 up and running. He was trying to get that going, and it wasn't quite the right time. He was still kind of getting pushed in towards making it a big tub thumping kind of John Wayne film, unquestioning patriotic film, and that's not what he really wanted to make. So
there was no Mark Hamill in 1959 either. He needed to wait until the
not worth speaking of. No. Yeah, so he's kind of dialing it back, and he also talks in his autobiography about basically kind of being done with studio filmmaking to a certain degree. He had the experience of the ending of 40 Guns being changed to something that he didn't want it to be, and by sort of scaling everything back and going back to the cheap budgets and the fast shoots, he felt like he could exercise a lot more creative control. So this is actually one of the last films made for RKO Pictures before that folded and was eventually distributed by Columbia because it had already gone by the time it finished. But yeah, this was made on a low budget. That classic trade-off: no money, artistic control kind of thing.
Yeah, there is a lot of stock footage. I don't want to put the cart before the horse here because we're not starting to talk about the film. But there's probably, if it's running time, there's probably a good like 10th of that is probably just like stock footage of the war, and everything that involves like any battles or anything is all stock footage. And at the beginning, I was thinking, I don't like this because I don't like when the film quality is so different. but then it really redeems it. I don't want to, like I say, go too far because we'll talk about it when we get there. But the way it uses stock footage throughout the rest of the film is really good, and I think it kind of justifies itself as it kind of goes on. Actually,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of used in the same way to begin with that's using the steel helmet, and you think, oh, they've got no money, they're just chucking it in, and then it becomes more apparent what the use of it actually is as you go along.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
It's not just a cheap way of putting in some realistic looking battle scenes, but it feels like that to begin with.
It does.
But yeah, another reason was that I mean, I'll read you a little bit from his autobiography.
Please do.
This was it was also a film that a lot of the executives didn't think that people were ready for, a film that humanized Germans after the war, basically. So no studio was in the mood to make a movie about a German who wasn't. Oh, this is a story. This is going back a page that I didn't screenshot, where he wanted to make sort of about a newspaper baron who was publishing anti-Hitler stuff and was, you know, things didn't end well for him. It was a biopic that he wanted to make, but at the time it was too close to the war. Nobody wanted to make a film about a German who wasn't a Nazi. So he says, thanks to my war experience, I learned firsthand that every German was not a Nazi. Still, the studios shied away from any picture dealing with contemporary Germany. Americans have been overwhelmed with images of the Holocaust, proof of Hitler's most monstrous final solution. The public couldn't empathize with German civilians who'd been caught up in the Nazi madness. If they didn't wear swastika, went popular opinion, they all looked the other way during Hitler's reign. He shows this script to a producer called William Dozier, and he thinks it's a good story but risky, and basically says, you can make it, I'm just not going to give you much money, and you've got to make it before anyone starts objecting. So yeah, so why don't you take us away with the plot? As is,
I will. The thing I want to mention as well, to give context to this, is that I recently watched Stanley Kramer's Judgment at Nuremberg, and that's 2 years after this. And it's interesting to hear the context you've given of the kind of the appetite for kind of talking about Germans and were all Germans Nazis, and Germany immediately after the war being kind of quite low, because it's interesting because it kind of feels like maybe Verboten kind of opened the floodgates a little bit, because you get Judgment of Nuremberg in 1961, 2 years later, which won Oscars and was kind of a big sort of awards movie. And what's really interesting as well, and it might just be that the footage you see, again, sort of spoiler warning for later in this film, they go to the Nuremberg trials in this film, and you see this long run of film of stock footage that's really harrowing. But that run of stock footage, that might just be the footage that was shown at the trial, because that's the exact same run of footage you see in Judgment of Nuremberg. So I don't know. I'm guessing Judgment of Nuremberg doesn't just go, oh, Sam Fuller put some reel together, we'll just use it. But you do see, I was watching it, seeing all the same clips I'd just seen in Judgment of Nuremberg. And it's interesting that Fuller was there first, because that's the more famous film.
Well, he was there first, literally. I don't know if this is the footage that he shot, but he shot about 30-40 minutes of footage at Falkenau when they liberated it. I couldn't dig in to find out if that's literally his footage in this film, but certainly, you know, that footage is available online in a little documentary in full.
Yeah.
And it's the same sort of thing, you know. It's the liberation footage as the kind of the emaciated survivors are being sort of led out, and then all the bodies being cleared and put into mass graves. You know, it's pretty harrowing stuff. So it's not just, you know, it's footage that must really have hit home for Fuller, because because of his direct line into it.
Experience.
Both firsthand and behind the camera as well, you know.
The other thing is that Judgment in Nuremberg hits a lot of similar beats to this. Judgment in Nuremberg has lots of characters who are Germans who tell the American characters, like Spencer Tracy's this American judge, and he's meeting German people. And often they'll say, well, not all Germans were Nazis. You know, we can't judge us all by being that we're all Nazis. And you get that kind of dual thing of like the film making a point of the fact that obviously they weren't all Nazis, but at the same time, there being that kind of wry commentary you also get in Verboten. Where people will be like, yeah, it's funny, as soon as the war ended, it's funny, we can't find any of these Nazis anywhere. No one was a Nazi. And you get that sort of comment in Verboten. You also get that 2 years later in Judgment in Nuremberg. You get that. And it's also the kind of the questions it's grappling with about whether all the Germans are responsible and all this kind of thing. So it's just really interesting to see that this was 2 years before, because Judgment in Nuremberg, like I say, more well-known film, Oscar film, very good film, but it's kind of following Verboten, and it does feel like some of the stuff that happens in Verboten has kind of opened, I don't know, maybe permission to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Judgment in Nuremberg isn't just it's an Oscar bait film, isn't it? It's huge ensemble cast,
yeah,
of really established actors. It's one of those sort of heavy, like it feels like a film that's been machine tooled for awards season, if you were to sort of look at it and modernize. So the idea that people weren't ready, and then, like you say, just 2 years later, it being sort of the most mainstream of mainstream kind of releases. Like you say, that's really interesting.
So this one, Verboten, basically is about an American infantryman. Fuller picks the
David Brent.
Sorry?
Called David Brent.
Oh, he is called David Brent. I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, he's called David Brent. And this American infantryman is with the 45th Division. The only reason I mention that is because the film mentions it, because of the fact that apparently, and you can look this up, and I didn't know about it beforehand, the 45th Division used to wear the swastika on their insignia, on their shoulders, because the film, he attributes it to being a Native American symbol, but I've also obviously heard it being described as a Buddhist symbol and stuff like that. So I don't know the origins, but in the film, he says that, oh, it's a Native American symbol. The 45th Division used to wear it before we changed it to an eagle. So there's already kind of stuff being played with there about the appropriation of the imagery and the way that kind of Hitler's, I guess, tarred a lot of things with the Nazi brush that maybe shouldn't be kind of seen that way. And so there's a significance to him being in the 45th Division. But anyway, he begins the movies. Him and two other fellas who die very quickly are basically trying to pursue a German sniper through the kind of rubble of a German city. The town or the city, whatever, is never specified. It's just like a place in Germany.
Looks a bit like Full Metal Jacket, doesn't it, to begin with?
It does, yeah. Just like shooting on a place where there is some rubble about and kind of going, oh, this is Germany. But yeah, so it's like it's basically the last days of the war. Like the war ends like next scene. This is like the final bit of the war, and then the rest of the film sort of in the immediate aftermath of the war. So he's chasing down this sniper. He gets shot in the bum, and then he gets patched up by Helga, who is this German woman who basically, it seems, is, she's desperate, and there's a question of her motivations. Is she trying to hide him because she wants an American as a meal ticket? And that's kind of the central tension in the film with their relationship is she using him, or does she fall in love with him? In true Fuller fashion, it seems like they fall in love at the drop of a hat. And then soon get married, and there's kind of no chemistry between them, as is the way. But at least in this case, that's kind of in the text. Like you're supposed to be questioning this relationship.
I think the question of the relationship carries through the marriage. It's still there. Like it's not they don't fall in love and get married necessarily.
Well, he does get patched up and then go, I don't care what anybody says, Helga, I'm gonna marry you.
Oh, he falls for her. But she's not necessarily fallen for him, even at the point where they're married.
No, but what I'm saying, I agree completely. And actually, like, to spoiler warning, I gave this 4 on Letterboxd. I really like this film, but like as my mental journey was going on watching the film, I was thinking, here we go. He's not all of these full of romances where these two, you know. But anyway, the film is cleverer than that, and it kind of goes on this situation, like I say, where you're supposed to sort of be weighing up how much does she care about him and all of this. He's very earnestly all in on her, but what does she think of him really? And is she just using him because the Americans have access to food and stuff? And then you find out, well, basically he leaves the army and decides that he can marry her because he can't be with her if he's serving in the army. So he decides to become a civilian and work for the American military occupying government. So he marries her as part of the government. They have a honeymoon, which feels so, I'm sure people did shit like that, but it feels so bizarre for someone to be like taking a honeymoon in like post-war Germany. But anyway, they go on their post-war Germany honeymoon down the Rhine or whatever it is, and then they have this tension where there's the werewolves, which is the organization that Himmler put in place with all these Nazis, underground resistance people, a lot of Hitler Youth and stuff like that, who are on the underground trying to kind of get the Americans to leave and killing American soldiers. And you see that she has kind of connections to these people. So you've also got this question of, is she actually actively going to be working against him? Is she conspiring against the Americans? And you've also got the tension of these werewolves. You know, are they gonna kill our, you know, protagonist? Are they kind of, what are they gonna do? He gets sort of in trouble for confronting them, and he kind of loses his job. And then he's kind of obviously in a really vulnerable way. And then the film sort of wraps itself up fairly quickly from there, where kind of he gets kind of Deus Ex Machina information about them, and he immediately tells everyone, and it's all kind of resolved. And the film ends like really suddenly in the way that kind of some old films do. But it's interesting because I saw a review of it just on Wikipedia, one of the kind of the reception kind of bits on that. There's a contemporary review of it where somebody said that it was kind of Fuller at his most sort of unsubtle, but they meant like in a good way, like it's just unsubtle kind of Sam Fuller. And I agree with that. It is, because like there are lots of things in it where they will just tell you exactly, heart on sleeve, exactly what the point of exactly what they're doing is. But at the same time, there's a lot more scope and complexity in this film as well, and it's kind of really hard to kind of keep both those things. They seem contradictory because it's really unsubtle, but there's actually quite a deal of sophistication and scope, because you get the Nuremberg trials, you get stuff about the war crimes, you get stuff about the werewolves, you get stuff about the occupying government, you get the hunger in post-war Germany and the desperation, and these women who are like marrying GIs so they can get food, and all this stuff's going on. And it paints such a vivid, it feels like it's from his lived experience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really does.
I mean, apart from Brent, who's your typical kind of milquetoast,
yes,
Fuller protagonist, everybody's got this kind of rich interior life that is conflicted. There's like you say, he says what he sees a lot of the time, but it's like saying, it's like he's going, that's a really difficult emotion that you can't deal with, isn't it? And like just getting people to sort of
this isn't a frame of reference maybe every listener will get, but it's like if Roy Kent was making a film, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. It is like that. He's just like, he's angrily calling out people for their inability to reconcile difficult emotional and kind of, I don't know, the people who can't reconcile their previous actions, and he's not condemning them for it. He's just pointing at them and shouting out their
There are a few bits like that where it feels like, because I've not read Fuller's biography like you have, but from the bits you've read out, I get a sense of his sort of voice and his sort of attitude. And there are bits in this film that do feel just like unfiltered, just like, you know, those bits when we were talking about Kurosawa, there were some bits in the films where it felt like, and now Kurosawa is giving a bit of a lecture about something he feels a bit annoyed about. And there are a few times in this film where it feels like Fuller's kind of leaning into the camera and he's talking through a character. My favorite is there's this like army captain who starts talking about the scourge of like juvenile delinquency. And he's like giving this really earnest thing. It might as well be like one of those disclaimers at the beginning of like an old Warner Brothers gangster movie. He starts talking about how, well, it's these Hitler Youth people, not the older people doing it. And we're also dealing with the scourge of juvenile delinquency in the United States. These kids with nowhere to go. And, you know, it's
broken families, no fathers.
Yeah. It's very, but at the same time, it's serving the purpose a lot of the film does of trying to draw a parallel between things that are going on
Yeah.
in Germany, things that are going on in the United States, and trying to humanize people. And
But
it's
it's like
interesting.
it's like he's turning to the German audience and saying,
We get it.
yeah, we get it. You know, you guys are struggling struggling to reconcile what happened. What did you actually do though? What is your part in that? And he's turning to the others and saying, these people are struggling. They can't reconcile what they're doing. It's the same thing, but it's like, you don't be dicks. You don't be dicks. But he's shouting the same thing at both of them. It's quite.
It is.
Yeah,
It
and
is
again,
like
that's
that.
something we've come up with before. The kind of what side of the political argument does he land on, and it's more nuanced than you think. He's just got a way of shouting at you, and that's kind of running through all his films.
Exactly, and I think this is another thing. Like when I was saying about trying to reconcile that it's very unsubtle, but also got this kind of scope to it. All of that stuff's true. We were saying about how he is kind of being even-handed. He is trying to kind of humanize and empathize to some extent with some of the German characters, and yet at the same time, he makes the most cartoonish Nazis in this film. There are people in this film who just stand up and basically say, "I am a Nazi. I am evil, and I hate." And I want you to, it's just full of these caricatures. There's like an SS man at the beginning of the film who is almost discovering the soldier when he's wounded, and he's kind of confronting Helga. And he goes on rants about how he gets angry with her because she thanks God. And he starts.
And there's also a suggestion that he's kind of like intimidated her into sex as well, isn't there? Or like sort of sexually assaulted her, basically.
Yeah.
But as he comes in and finds a place to sleep for the night and sort of says, yeah, we'll be comfortable in here. And then as in the morning, he gets out of the bed and he's sort of doing up his belt and everything. There is this quite strong insinuation that she's been sort of coerced into sleeping with him.
Yeah, exactly. And you get him, and you also get the character, I can't remember the character's name now, but he's like the main werewolf chap. The actor apparently died in a car crash before the film came out.
I thought he was really good.
He's really good, but his character does have some really outrageous, just like,
of course,
I fucking hate people. Come on, let's all do Nazi shit sort of dialogue.
But I thought, the actor, the performance itself, considering it was so broad, is really good. The guy's got
really
he's got such an expressive face and such kind of, he puts so much subtlety into what he's physically doing when the words are so blunt as well. I was really impressed with him, and first time I watched it, actually, I thought, oh, he's really good. What else did he do? And apparently what else he did was die in a car crash.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, like, there's a real mishmash in here of, like, is it Susan Cummings? Is that the actress?
Yeah.
Susan Cummings and that bloke Tom something, who's the guy who died in the car crash.
Tom
Pittman, Susan Cummings. They both are actually kind of doing German accents. And then Fuller also lets, like, the guy that plays, there's some kid who seems like he's walked off Leave It to Beaver or something, who's like playing her brother. Yeah. And he's a German as well, but he's a German in the mold of being like, gee Wilkers, hey sis. So it's like
he's terrible, isn't he?
He's terrible.
He's absolutely awful.
He's actively bad. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting that, like, because you can go one of two ways with these things, where you can say, okay, nobody's doing an accent or everybody's doing an accent. And he's just been like, no, fine. You can just be like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm a German. It's very strange. And I don't know who that kid knew or what information he had on anybody, but how he made into the film. But I feel like that's often the Fuller way as well, is that he's so concerned with just finishing the movie and shooting everything in one take that people like this can kind of slip through the cracks, can't they, in a Fuller film?
He does kind of, absolutely. I kind of feel like, especially the way he writes in his biography and what he says quite often about being, down by both sides, is that he's got a certain amount of contempt for his audience, where, like, I'm making my point. If you can't keep up, if you don't get it, I'm moving on anyway. Like, you know, if you don't understand what I'm saying, then bollocks to you. You're just too stupid. And he's kind of got that sort of attitude in quite a lot of his films, I think. But yeah, anyway.
It's another one. To go back to the beginning. I'm just going to go through some of my notes. So, like, was this one you made a lot of notes on, or you?
No, I'd watched it before. I kind of
Yeah.
I had to watch it. I had to watch it in bed on my phone, so I didn't get the chance to make notes.
I made quite a few notes on this one, so I'm just going to talk through some of them. So, I really like straight away in the film and this kind of sums up the dual personality of this film as well in terms of its subtlety and its on the noseness. I really like the framing of the title card because there's a sign saying that I think it's drinking's forbidden or something.
Yeah.
And it says, something like the Verboten. And you get these two soldiers who cover up the other word, so you can only see Verboten kind of in the background. And I thought that's a really cool title card. That's really subtle. I love that, the way they frame that. It says Verboten there. And then Fuller zooms in on it. And then a character says, "Oh, it's Verboten. That means forbidden." And then a song starts playing where it goes Verboten, Verboten, and I was like, oh, so it seemed like he'd done like a really cool thing.
He was forced to put that song on it when it got picked up by Columbia, and he hated it. Yeah. But he was just like, oh, fine. He just didn't put up a fight. He just was forced to put this Paul Anka song on it.
It's another one where you get the credit of written, produced, and directed by Samuel Fuller. I noticed the opening credits are very TV sitcom because they show things that kind of they're just stills of things that later actually just happen in the film, and which is very strange for a movie. And it's very abrupt as well. Maybe because
the only thing I know that does that is Mission Impossible. When in the title sequences where you see the whole film in sort of film socialism. I can't speak French. In Godard style, you see the whole film play out. But anyway.
Yeah, it's so you see these kind of things. It's very abrupt credits, and it makes sense now that you've said you didn't want that song because it's so jarring tonally. The way everything to do with the sound design of those credits and how it starts and ends is so jarring, and like he didn't give a shit because the song starts. You just see all these clips of stuff that's already in the film behind the song, and then as soon as the song ends, it's just a really thud edit to just then people talking, and it really isn't smooth at all. And it kind of, now that you've said that, it kind of makes sense. Like they gave him a song and he was just forced to just put it there, and he just did.
Well, that's the thing. He talks also about because he uses a lot of classical music in this, specifically Beethoven, and he talks about having a lot of Beethoven playing through his mind as he was in Germany, and just sort of earworming a lot of the time, and that's kind of why he chooses to use a lot of classical Beethoven music in it. And I think that's what he wanted. He wanted a fully Beethoven soundtrack. He didn't quite get it.
Yeah, that's a shame because he uses music really well in the film. Otherwise, apart from the thing that was obviously forced on him, there's a bit I noted early in the film where he's saying that all Germans are Nazis, and that the main character, Martin Brest, David Brent, is saying that all Germans are Nazis, and Helga must be a Nazi because she kind of let the war go on and she let the Nazis happen. And then her brother, the G. Willikers sis guy, comes in, and he's lost an arm, and he immediately just starts slapping the guy. Just starts slapping him, starts slapping the soldier who's on the bed with his functioning arm. And then the Helga says, "Oh, I'm sorry about him, but he blames you for loss of his arm because he blames all Americans because it was the war that took his arm, and he blames all the Americans." And it's not particularly subtle, but it's another indication in the film of where he's just blamed her for everything that the Germans have done, and here's her brother blaming him for everything the Americans have done. And it kind of shows already that sort of the fault of how faulty that logic is to kind of tar everybody with that same brush. Which I thought was an interesting way to go about it. It felt at the beginning to me, maybe because of the boy as well being this kind of oh hey kind of guy, it felt like a sitcom episode at the start because it felt like there's a sitcom about Helga and her brother, and oh no, they've got to hide a wounded American soldier.
Yeah,
well, this man's gone round. Is he going to find him?
That's one of the things about it actually, because it is low budget and there's kind of a limited amount of sets that they use, which you can imagine on a sitcom soundstage. You've got the house, you've got the government building with which you spend a lot of time in listening to government things. But yeah, it does kind of feel a little bit like that.
I want to say, like, I really, really liked several scenes in this film. One of I like the whole film, but what I mean is there are several scenes in this film that I think are maybe some of his best work. There's sorry, my dog is trying to get down from a high place. There's a scene where Helga, where we first kind of get the reveal that maybe Helga's not on the level with her feelings when she meets the Tom is it Tom Pittman? Did we say?
Yeah,
We agreed on Pittman. The Tom Pittman character, when he first comes in, this kind of guy in his Nazi uniform, and she's helping him, and then she starts to kind of seem like maybe she's a bit cavalier and just using him for the money, and she kind of accepts that he's kind of her American meal ticket. There's a scene there that plays out between the two of them at a table in her place, all shot just in one take, that's got so much nice acting business going on in it. They're kind of consistently, both of them are doing a lot of things like smoking cigarettes, lighting each other's cigarettes, opening these Hershey bars and eating bits of chocolate and talk about them all. And it's all going on in this one frame, in this one unbroken take. And I was just really engaged with it. It felt just like a really nice, natural feeling, organic scene playing out between the two.
There's a lot of tension in that scene as well. You know, there's some sexual tension in it as well. They've got more chemistry than any of Fuller's protagonist has with their leads. But also there's a tension of Pittman's kind of this Aryan type, and you kind of also there's also a suspicion not only that she's using him as a meal ticket, but also is she going to be part of this?
Yeah,
werewolves. Is she part of this kind of resistance to the occupying American government? And it's not clear at that point. It's a really kind of, for me, that's sort of when the film turns, actually. Like, that's when it starts to get the subtleties of it start to kind of creep in from this kind of more bombastic kind of start.
And I know it's a Fuller thing, really, to kind of want to just shoot things in one take and kind of move on. So I don't think this one single camera setup with this long unbroken take was necessarily kind of artistically motivated, but it's a really nice scene that plays out, and the longness of that take, kind of the unbroken nature of that take, kind of allows the performance a lot of room to breathe between two of them, for them to play off each other in a way that's really nice, and that you don't always get in these types of movies, especially if they kind of cut a lot more and, you know, close-ups and reverse shots and all of that. And then there's similarly another really nice one afterwards where a lot of the subtlety comes out of the stuff it's exploring in the immediate aftermath of Germany and the issues that are going on there, where we just spend some time with this captain who's working in the American military government in his office, and various people are coming in and they've got various issues he's trying to solve. He's also trying to look for war criminals. He's putting pictures of war criminals on a board. People are coming in complaining about things. He's having to solve little disputes. A guy comes in who's a Nazi, but he's also an expert in defusing bombs. So they're like, well, you're a Nazi, but we really need people to defuse bombs. So put this guy to work. And he's kind of juggling a lot of these things.
And there's suspicion about some of the people who work there are under suspicion, and some of them realize they're under suspicion. And that board at the back with the war criminals as well, like there's like several different headings. It's kind of the one that I spotted was mass atrocities, but then there's also kind of these different kind of these like files, like, you know, mass atrocity. You know, it's really like you get the impression that this guy's not just juggling a lot of things, but that, you know, like this job's like really hard emotionally. Like,
the background has lots of stuff written on the wall, like slave labor and Gestapo and mass war crimes and all this kind of stuff, all written everywhere, in a way that feels like this was an early Fuller script, because he does the exact same thing in Baron of Arizona. Do you remember in Baron of Arizona, he's got an office that's just ridiculously, like, everything's spelled out in massive letters all over the back of the wall, and so you kind of get this in here, and it's kind of plays in again to, at the same time, the lack of subtlety, because this mise en scène is not very realistic. It's all labeled so that we see things. It's all labeled very big so that we can read everything. There are drawers that have labels that are massive so that we can read them. They're not just done for the people in the office to read them. They're done for the camera to pick them up. But at the same time, there's the depth of the fact that he is putting these things in here for the audience to see and to appreciate, to paint the picture and give depth to what this guy's doing. So it's again this kind of dichotomy. He's kind of going into depth, but he's always shouting you about what you need to be looking at. And I
think that, I think that's kind of, I think that's a sort of, I think that's sort of a necessary evil of the kind of technology and the system of working and the speed in that time. You could make it much subtler if you had more time to shoot it, if you could move in for close-ups and things like that. I'm sure their offices had this stuff and the big maps and the kind of the filing and all that. Maybe not quite
as large.
Yeah. But I think it's Herzogian is ecstatic truth, I think. Is
yes,
in that.
I think you're right there, and it's not something I'm criticizing. Like I enjoyed it a lot, but this is another long take. Or maybe it was because it had just come off the back of one of the two people talking over the Hershey's chocolate and cigarettes. But I then noticed that this was also just one long unbroken take, and it has a lot of sophistication for like. You get these different camera setups that kind of happen in it where he'll like move the camera in one direction and pull it back to another kind of setup and then push in on something else. And this scene has a lot of moving parts as well. Lots of people coming in and out. He moves to different parts of this room and he's kind of looking at different boards and picking up these pictures of war criminals and hanging them on the wall. There's a lot of stuff going on in this scene and it's kind of this one take again. And I think as well, like I said with the previous scene, it really just has a really nice energy, like room to breathe to it. And it feels very lived in. Like it just feels like these things are, because sometimes in Fuller movies, some of the early ones in particular, things can feel very set bound and very stagey and you kind of get like Park Row syndrome. Yeah. And this does not feel like that at all. This feels like, we're in this guy's office and here's people coming in and out and this is his work day. And I really appreciated that. Like I really liked that sequence in particular. It's that and the Hershey's and cigarettes scene, the Jim Jarmusch Hershey's and cigarettes are my two favorite probably bits in the film for how they're done. I really like them.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, if they were, the Hershey's and cigarettes less so, but the one in the office could easily be a very inert kind of exposition dump, but it doesn't play like that. It really doesn't. It also, it's really difficult as well to remember. And I've watched this film twice, and I watched it less than 12 hours ago. Who's he actually speaking to? Like, there are other characters there, but it is a very kind of internal.
I think the werewolf man, Mr. Pittman, is there, isn't he? He's on the staff, and that's one of the things is that he's using his position as one of these police. Right, but it doesn't involve our main guy. It doesn't involve that scene. I don't think
he disappears for quite a while, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's not really. For 20 minutes. He does, and the film's all the better for it because again, in the spirit of kind of the Fuller protagonist, he is unfortunately the least interesting thing in the movie. But it doesn't matter because everything else is really good. So then we get after that, we get another scene that it actually does cut in this one. It's not another long take, but there's one where we go into the kind of railway carriage where the werewolves are meeting, and they kind of have their internal dispute. You always kind of feel maybe because of how cartoonish some of the Nazis are. I almost felt they were going to bump the guy off who was kind of criticizing, but they seem to be kind of amiable with it. There's a guy who comes in and he says, look, what you're all doing is stupid. Okay, I joined this group so we could steal shit and eat food and just like have a good time. We're not going to defeat the Americans. You're mad. That's not going to happen. And he's kind of a dissenting voice among the werewolves, which kind of comes back later. He's the guy, I think, who basically the werewolves arrange a protest against the American government. They get loads of people in the street protesting against them and asking them to leave. And I think the dissenter is the guy who's kind of picked to kind of lead the protest. And it's very odd his the way he delivers his cries, because he ends everything he says by shouting the word "Yay!" The Americans need to leave. Yay! In this really strange way, the yay man. It was quite funny. And the kind of, this protest scene, it really struck me during the protest scene, actually, even though the protest scene's clearly low budget, you've got 20 people and then 2 American people. It doesn't feel like a kind of a big event. But it did capture something that I thought was interesting. It just made me think about something in the war, which is that whilst the army's rolling through Germany, obviously everyone's going to kind of behave and be in line. But as soon as the army's kind of pulling out and it's dispersed and it's all over the place, suddenly you are a few Americans surrounded by a massive local population. And how dangerous and scary that situation could and probably was. It could be.
Well, I mean, he speaks about this in his autobiography as well. He talks about this basically being the situation where despots are created, and this being similar to what happened after World War One. I wanted the movie to go beyond the isolated problem with the werewolves to the universal of poor people, mortal countries anywhere, trying to survive without a future, susceptible to the extremists who promise them food and hope. In times like those, a despot can easily come to power. To prepare for my movie, I read Little Man, What Now by Hans Fallada, I think. Fallada. According to if there hadn't been a depression after the Kaisers, there wouldn't have been a Hitler, basically. So that's the point. That's the point he's trying to make there, is kind of a universal point about what happens after VE Day and everybody's flag waving and all that kind of stuff. And the answer is quite depressing, as it usually is for Sam Fuller, but he shouts it at you.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that Judgment at Nuremberg has going for it that this film doesn't have, and it's not necessarily a thing that Fuller's missed, it's just not one of his preoccupations, but Judgment of Nuremberg presents this period very much through a lens of the Cold War, and it's got a lot of Cold War commentary going on throughout it, where it's talking about, it also is grappling with the willingness of the Americans to let lots of Nazis off and to compromise a lot of their values and to be lenient on a lot of people who committed war crimes, specifically because they wanted to then fight the Russians, and they were conscious they needed those people on side to repel the Soviet Union. And that's another element in play here as well, in that environment, isn't it, where you've got all of these people who are disgruntled, and the Americans having to sort of create the new world order for the Germans and the new Germany, and how compromised that situation obviously is as well. Which is, I recommend Judgment in Nuremberg. It's a very good film.
There's a weird little bit of trivia here, actually, that and one of Fuller's friends, a guy called Ray Kellogg, was a cameraman at Nuremberg, and kind of offered Sam Fuller almost the chance to go and be another cameraman at Nuremberg, and it's one of his great regrets that he didn't go and watch those trials and film, basically.
It's easy to go though, because anyone could have gone.
Yeah, I think because working, basically, that's the thing.
No, I'm joking.
They had church pews at the back.
Because there's a bit in the film where the chief workers Nazi, he doesn't believe that the Nazis did any bad things and all the war crimes and whatnot. And Helga says, "I'll prove it to you. I'll show you that they did all these things." So she nips on the bus. These are people that can't afford food and they don't have anything to eat and all this. They just nip on the bus. And they go down to the Nuremberg trials, and they just go in, and they kind of sit at the back. And
I don't think you ever had to book tickets, Rob. I think, if you didn't have any money, I think it's not One Wonderful Sunday. Anyway,
but they had to presumably pay bus fare. Are these just free Nuremberg trial buses bussing people in? Maybe, who cares? But it's like, it's something that felt very strange that she was able to just be like, all right, then I'll take you to the start of the Nuremberg trials tomorrow, where we can go see, Goering and everybody. Like that was really easy to sort of just randomly go on the bus and see. But it's as a narrative device, it's fine because it takes the movie into a place where it is starting to interrogate and look at the things that kind of actually happened during the war. And it's where we do get to see a lot of those atrocities and Holocaust things are kind of entered as exhibits. And I think it's really at this bit, as I said at the beginning, that it starts to retroactively sort of justify all the use of stock footage in the movie.
Because you get the story that, you immediately see it and you think, oh, is this a cheap way to do the battles? And actually no. And then maybe, and then when they're first there's a scene where like a potato cart or something gets toppled and everyone is grappling for these potatoes. I think there's a similar scene, isn't there, in China Gate, where everyone's trying to get hold of the food drop. And then that all of a sudden cuts to newsreel footage as well. There's newsreel footage of that before that, if I'm remembering rightly, and if I'm not getting confused with another film I watched yesterday, where you see VE Day celebrations in London, and these things start to sort of add up to the climax of seeing the Nuremberg trials and the film that was shown at the Nuremberg trials. Like you say, it kind of pays off. There's actually this kind of document. You realize as it goes on, it's sort of like a documentary realist thing that he's trying to put in there as it goes along, and it takes a while to pay off, but when it does, like you say, it retroactively makes the other stuff make more sense.
Yeah, there's also, I've got a list here of some things I wrote that are going on in this movie aside from kind of obviously the main narrative. You obviously get Nuremberg coming in, and you get the kind of crimes against humanity shown. But one of the other things is about the kind of conflicting views in the American armed forces, and Fuller must have seen this firsthand, the conflicting views in the American armed forces post-war about denazification, about whether denazification was necessary, about whether it was the Americans' job to help do it. There's a bit in this film where somebody says, the Germans need to do denazification, not the Americans. We shouldn't be involved in this. It's one of the main things in the George C. Scott Patton film, is that he's very adamantly and angrily against denazification. He's like, well, we've got no business doing that. We've won the war. We get the fuck out. I don't care if these Nazis are still in jobs. That's not my business. I don't care about that. And I guess Fuller must have seen that from some of his higher ups, from some of the people around, because that's again something that I think is in this film, not in a major way, but it's there. And that's one of the things I really like about this movie in general is that you just get the sense that he's put in a lot of things that he was aware of going on in that kind of immediate post-war bubble that he must have been in at the time.
Yeah, it's a scrappy little film, but it's kind of like one that really sort of punches high and punches hard. I really like this film.
I do too. Yeah,
it's strange that after the sort of we've seen the sort of the technical highs of Fuller so far in a film like 40 Guns, or even a film like Hell and High Water, which is narratively less successful but looks really great. And then we've sort of taken this sort of step backwards into sort of the more independent kind of aesthetic and shoot quickly, get it done. But it seems like that sophistication of stories managed to sort of carry on again. Like what struck me as well, as this is a continuation from 40 Guns, is that 40 Guns is more of an ensemble, and there's lots of interpersonal things going on that are quite subtle and kind of more emotionally rich, and that's what's happening here as well. And there's also just a couple of kind of strange little themes that have popped up a couple of times, and that's like same as Run of the Arrow. These are the last bullets being shot in the war before we meet. It's a weird little thing to carry on with.
It's interesting because you would have written this 1949 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so 10 years prior, and you mentioned just now that kind of similarity of Run of the Arrow, and you also mentioned the similarity with something that happens in China Gate with the food thing. So it's obviously possible that he's had all those ideas then, and that before he knows he's going to make this film, he starts putting some of them in his other films. It kind of does feel informed like that.
And this is, I think, this is him circling back, because we'll talk about the Crimson Kimono next time. But like I say, the Crimson Kimono comes about because he's not ready to make the Big Red One. So the Big Red One runs through all of this as he kind of basically readies himself and kind of hones his craft and waits for the
training montage.
Yeah, he's kind of he waits for the right time to make that film, and he doesn't want to make it too early when he hasn't got the kind of the chops for it. He doesn't want to make it when people still want to make John Wayne films. He kind of holds on to it and spends his time honing it. It is around about this time, maybe it's a little bit earlier, that he makes Dogface, which was essentially like the TV pilot for a TV version of the Big Red One, which ultimately goes nowhere, and something we should probably watch when we get to the Big Red One because it's only 20 minutes or so. But yeah, it's interesting that these ideas seem to be percolating, and they percolate for quite a long time, and just bubble out every now and then. But yeah,
I was very happy watching this because I've obviously been up and down on some of the Fuller stuff in the Fox period. There were a lot of those films like Home and High Water and around that time where, in terms of my letterbox scores, he was ranging from a 2 to a 3.5 for a lot of that period. And I was kind of watching them thinking, I mean, I'm committed now. I'm going to watch them all, but I'm not sure I actually really give too much of a fuck about Sam Fuller. And the thing is that the last one being really good, 40 Guns, and now he's away from Fox, and this is good. And I've seen Crimson Kimono, and I know that's good. And we've got Shock Corridor and Naked Kiss and things coming up, which are among his most celebrated movies. I've got the Criterion editions of those, so they've got that seal of auteurist approval. So I feel like now that we're out of the Zanuck sort of Fox era, and now that it is very much written, produced, directed by Sam Fuller, we're going to get much more of that kind of his auteurist sensibilities coming through. I think his best films are the ones where people talk in Sam Fullerisms and just say exactly what they mean and shout his opinions at you. Those are the best ones. I think some of the Fox ones were written by other people and they're a bit compromised. Some of them I think just felt like studio movies with a few interesting moments.
Yeah. Well, if we think about also the stuff that after Park Row, you've got Pick Up on South Street that's really good, and then House of Bamboo's got plenty of redeeming features about it, but doesn't quite hold together. Same thing with China Gate, although I think I was a lot warmer on that than you were. I like the clear progression in his work up to this point. Like he started out with Jesse James and Baron of Arizona, which are kind of very much early films, and then kind of sparks and shows what he's capable of ultimately with Steel Helmet, and then it just kind of there's this little kind of bubbling progression in his films. It's a lot slower, I think, than it is for a lot of other filmmakers, but it feels like there is a definite incline throughout his work, and I think, like you say, we're getting towards the top of it now, and I think everything that comes through, like Naked Kiss, is the last one he makes before Shark, and I'm a big fan of Naked Kiss, and then we need to track down Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street because I've got no idea if that's good or not. But yeah,
absolutely. The what I would say is that like there's a progressiveness in terms of at least the casting and his kind of attitudes towards race and stuff in the Lippert films that isn't really there in the Fox films. There's elements of it in some of the Fox films, like the In Hell or High Water, the submarine does have a fairly mixed cast of people, but notably not Black and Asian people in the way that he does, for example, in Steel Helmet, where
there's quite a mix of Jared Leto accents in that film as well, isn't there?
There is, it's all in Hell or High Water and in Steel Helmet as well. A lot of those films, he has this kind of big group, and in Fixed Bayonets, he'll have this like big group of soldiers, and one of them will be really Italian and all that kind of thing. But in those early movies like Steel Helmet, he clearly wanted to involve actors from across kind of different racial backgrounds and things like that, and was very interested in Steel Helmet as well, very openly talking about racism in America, something which disappears from his films through the Fox period completely. And so it's interesting where we're heading next with Crimson Kimono, because now that he's an independent man doing his own Sam Fuller written, produced, directed thing, we're now going to get an uncharacteristic sort of late 50s film that is entirely about Japanese American characters. And that's really interesting. I've seen this one before. It is really, really good. But it's interesting that now that he's kind of loose from Fox, he's able to kind of explore things again that feel like some of the things he was interested in earlier in his career.
I mean, there's Yeah, I think there's, if I remember rightly, I think Underworld USA is to do with communism in the US. If I'm right, I might be completely wrong, but if that is the case, it's quite interesting. We're going through little trilogy, if you like, of about German people after the war, the experience of Japanese Americans after the war, and then perceptions of communists after the war. I'd be completely off about that. I might be completely off, but yeah, I'm sure that sure another one will come. I am completely off, but maybe I'm thinking of something else.
They do all have, if they're a trilogy of anything, they have amazing titles.
Okay.
I mean, Crimson Kimono and Underworld USA, they are good titles of films. I'll say that.
Yeah. All right, but anyway, cool. Well, that was good. That was a nice chat, I think.
It was indeed. I enjoyed that, and it always helps when I actually enjoy the film that I'm talking about. So that's nice. I'm excited to watch it. Like I said, I've seen Crimson Kimono before doing this podcast. It was one of 3 Fuller films I'd seen, and I really like it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. You've seen it or you've not?
No. This is one that you've seen that I haven't. So you'd seen this Steel Helmet, and what was the other one?
Shock Corridor.
Shock Corridor.
Yeah.
Okay.
So interesting.
Yeah, so we've got 2 good ones coming up very soon.
Exactly. I'm very excited to revisit this one. So in the next few weeks, we'll have to don our crimson kimonos as we trek up the mountain trail on our path to fuller understanding. Thank you very much for watching / listening, and we'll see you next time.